So, good afternoon, students, and today we are going to revise all the literary terms. And in third year, as you know, that you've got a lot of literary terms in your course, and the first is dramatic monologue. Though we have already done dramatic monologue in our class, but just for a revision, uh, what is dramatic monologue? First of all, it is important for you to understand that it is a type of poetry. And what type of poetry it is? It is a long speech spoken by a single person. Now, we may have one question also that soliloquy is also a speech which is spoken by a single person, but there is a difference between soliloquy and a dramatic monologue. That a dramatic monologue always has a silent listener in it, which a soliloquy does not have. And soliloquy and dramatic monologue, they have some similarities also, as I told you, that both have single speakers, and the difference basically lies in the presence of silent listener in dramatic monologue. But in a soliloquy there is no such listener. Actually, it is meant to be spoken alone, the soliloquy, because soliloquy is a speech that a person speaks to himself. It is like speaking or thinking aloud. Okay, so the very first thing for us to understand is that both have single speakers, but in a soliloquy, the speaker is all alone on the stage. So that is why his most inner feelings, his real self comes out in his speech. His inner motives, his plannings, his hatreds, which he cannot reveal in front of other people. But in a dramatic monologue, there is no such secret thing, because he is speaking all his thoughts or feelings in presence of a listener, but the listener is silent. The listener is silent, as in The Last Ride Together, the beloved is silent. As in my last Duchess, the messenger who has brought a marriage proposal, second marriage proposal, he is also silent. So here, now I think it is clear for you, the difference is clear. Now, what is dramatic monologue? Let us understand these two terms, dramatic and monologue. Monologue, as the term explains in itself, is this is a word made by two words, mono plus log. Mono means single. So here we know that there is a single speaker, and log means speech. Now, what does this term dramatic signify? Dramatic means there are certain dramatic elements in the poem itself. For example, first of all, it starts abruptly. It starts with a certain, it is a sudden start poem without any introductory remark, without any background, it just starts. So this is the very first dramatic element in it. Then we have a lot of other things. For example, the rhetoric sort of language. There are a lot of rhetoric questions, and there are a lot of punctuation marks. There are pauses, there are stops, there are exclamation marks, there are dashes. So all these things make a poem, this poem, dramatic. Plus, by the way of speaking of the speaker, we comes to know that he is interacting with the silent listener. Because of his reactions, of the silent listener's observations, we come to know of the presence of the silent listener. Then the poem generally, it deals with a crisis. For example, crisis means an important moment in life. Okay. For example, in My Last Ride Together, the poet is about to depart from his beloved, and for the last time they are having a ride together. And in My Last Duchess also, he is talking to a messenger, and it means that he wants to marry again. So I think it is clear. And the second figure of speech in your syllabus is paradox. Now, paradox is a very, very important figure of speech, and there are a lot of poems in your course which have this element of paradox, which have paradoxical examples in them. So, first of all, I would like to remind you that in first year you studied oxymoron. If you remember, oxymoron is joining two words which are opposite in nature with each other. So there are three things: oxymoron, paradox, and antithesis. So you have paradox and antithesis in your course, but in order to understand paradox and antithesis, you need to first revise what is an oxymoron. So oxymoron is a figure of speech in which two opposite things are juxtaposed with each other. Juxtaposed means forcibly they are put together. So, for example, pleasing pains, vanquished victor. If you remember the poem, The Power of Music, or Alexander's Feast, we have this expression of oxymoron. The vanquished victor. Vanquished means who is defeated, and victor means who is victorious. But both these words, which are opposite in nature, they are juxtaposed with each other. So this is an example of oxymoron. Now, you see, paradox, antithesis, and oxymoron, all these three figures of speech, they deal with something opposite in nature. This is very, very important for you to understand that all these three are basically, they are figures of speech which deal with something opposite in nature. Oxymoron deals with opposite words. Paradox deals with opposite thoughts, and antithesis deals with opposite thoughts but presented in a structure which is opposite to each other. Means it is seen in the grammatical structure. So now I think it is clear what is an oxymoron. First of all, I would like to repeat that oxymoron is a figure of speech in which two opposite words are joined together. For example, pleasing pains and vanquished victor. Now, let us move towards paradox. Paradox is a figure of speech in English literature used widely in poetry as well as prose, but generally it is used in poetry also, and there are a lot of examples in your third year syllabus also. For example, in your poem, The Sea and the Skylark, in the first stanza itself, the poet says, two noises too old to end. Now, it is a paradox. Now, it is a very contradictory thing. Now, what is a paradox? Paradox is something contradictory, something which seems very unusual to us. So, he says, two noises, too old to end. Now, isn't it very strange that the noises are so old that they cannot end? Generally what happens, that whatever is old, it is nearing its end. It means that now they are about to end. But he says too old to end. This is a paradox. Now, antithesis. What happens in an antithesis? Antithesis also conveys two opposite thoughts, but it has this line or this statement of antithesis. It has got a grammatical structure in which both the opposite thoughts are put parallel to each other. I will give you an example. For example, Speech is silver, but silence is gold. Now you see the grammatical structure. Speech is silver, but silence is gold. Now both these entities are joined with the conjunction but. Speech is silver, but silent is gold. Now this is a very good example of antithesis. Now patience is bitter, but it has a sweet fruit. Patience is bitter, but it has a sweet fruit. These are the examples of antithesis. Now antithesis is also like paradox only, but generally it is arranged in such a manner that you can see the grammatical structure. You can see two opposite clauses or phrases put together in a grammatical structure.